October 23rd to 26th, 1944 marked the death of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the waters of the Philippines. Over 3 days and 4 simultaneous engagements spanning 100,000 square miles, 282 ships and 200,000 sailors fought what remains history's largest naval battle. The outcome hinged on a series of decisions: strategic brilliance, desperate courage, controversial blunders, and one inexplicable Japanese withdrawal that saved an American invasion force from annihilation. The battle featured the last battleship versus battleship duel, the first organized kamikaze attacks, and what naval historian Samuel Eliot Morison called more gallantry, guts, and gumption than any engagement in U.S. Navy history. By October 1944, Japan faced strategic extinction. The Imperial Navy had lost nearly 500 aircraft and most experienced pilots at the Battle of the Philippine Sea 4 months earlier. Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Admiral Soemu Toyota, commander of the combined fleet, developed Shogo, Victory Operation, an all-or-nothing gamble to destroy MacArthur's invasion force at Leyte. The plan split Japanese naval power into 3 converging forces. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, the main striking arm, included 5 battleships, most critically the super-battleships Yamato and Musashi, the largest warships ever built. Displacing 72,000 tons each with 9 18.1-inch guns capable of firing 1.5-ton shells 26 miles, these behemoths would transit San Bernardino Strait and descend on American transports from the north. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force would push through Surigao Strait, creating a pincer attack. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force, 4 aircraft carriers with only 108 planes and barely trained pilots, would serve as sacrificial bait to lure away Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet. Admiral Toyota's post-war explanation captured Japan's desperation. Should we lose in the Philippines operations, even though the fleet should be left, the shipping lane to the south would be completely cut off so that the fleet, if it should come back to Japanese waters, could not obtain its fuel supply. The meaning of that order was that damage could not be limited or reduced by turning back, so advance, even though the fleet should be completely lost. The Philippines controlled Japan's lifeline to oil fields in the Dutch East Indies. Losing them meant the fleet would starve regardless of survival. MacArthur's invasion armada numbered over 700 ships supporting 130,000 troops landing at Leyte. On October 20, 1944, MacArthur waded ashore and delivered his famous broadcast, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." 2 American fleets would cover the landings, but a critical flaw undermined coordination. Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, under MacArthur, included 16 escort carriers in 3 Taffy groups, plus 6 old battleships, 5 of them Pearl Harbor survivors. Admiral William "Bull" Halsey's 3rd Fleet, under Nimitz, commanded the fast carriers and modern battleships. The 2 fleets operated under separate commands with no single admiral in overall control, a recipe for miscommunication that would nearly prove catastrophic. Halsey's orders from Nimitz contained fateful language. If the opportunity to destroy the Japanese fleet arose, such destruction becomes the primary task. Nimitz added this clause because he was disappointed that Admiral Spruance had let Japanese carriers escape at Philippine Sea. The aggressive Halsey would interpret these orders liberally. The battle's opening shots came from American submarines USS Darter and USS Dace, patrolling as a wolf pack in Palawan Passage. At 12:16 a.m. on October 23rd, Darter's radar detected a massive blip, Kurita's center force steaming toward the Philippines. At 5:24 a.m., Commander David McClintock's Darter surfaced and fired 6 torpedoes at the port column. At least 4 struck heavy cruiser Otago, Kurita's flagship. The admiral was swimming for his life within minutes. 10 minutes later, Dace's torpedoes blew apart heavy cruiser Maya, which sank almost immediately. Darter's stern tubes crippled Takao, removing 3 heavy cruisers and, critically, half of Kurita's communications staff. The contact report flashed to Pearl Harbor was one of the most significant of the war. American commanders now knew the location of Japan's main striking force. As Kurita's battered force entered the Sibuyan Sea, Halsey's carrier aircraft found them. The super-battleship Musashi, became the primary target. Beginning at 10:25 a.m., wave after wave of American dive bombers and torpedo planes attacked. Musashi's size made her impossible to miss. The first torpedo hit barely registered on the 72,000-ton giant. But the attacks continued relentlessly, 5 major waves totaling over 250 aircraft sorties. By 3:30 p.m., Musashi had absorbed 19 torpedo hits and 17 bombs. Her bow had sunk 26 feet below the waterline. Captain Toshihira Inoguchi, wounded in the shoulder, attempted to beach his dying ship. At 7:35 p.m., with her list reaching 30 degrees, Musashi capsized and sank, taking 1,023 men including Inoguchi, who chose to go down with his command. Many young sailors couldn't swim and went down clinging to the propellers. Kurita temporarily retreated westward, signaling Tokyo, "Were we to force our way through, we would merely make ourselves meat for the enemy." Admiral Toyoda's response was uncompromising. "With confidence in heavenly guidance, all forces will attack." At 5:15 p.m., without receiving another air attack, Kurita turned back toward San Bernardino Strait. That same afternoon, American search planes finally located Ozawa's decoy carriers northeast of Luzon. At 4:40 p.m., Halsey faced a decision that would haunt him forever. Several subordinates warned him. Admiral Willis Lee correctly deduced Ozawa's force was a decoy and urged caution. Rear Admiral Gerald Bogan reported that navigation lights in San Bernardino Strait had been lit, indicating the Japanese expected to use it. Night reconnaissance from USS Independence confirmed Kurita was heading back toward the strait. All warnings were brushed aside. At 7:50 p.m., Halsey made his decision. "I concentrated Task Force 38 during the night and steamed north." He took everything. All his battleships, all his carriers. Not even a picket destroyer was left to guard San Bernardino Strait. Halsey had earlier sent an ambiguous message suggesting a powerful surface force called Task Force 34 will be formed to guard the strait. Both Kincaid and Nimitz assumed this meant TF-34 was already in position. It was not. The message described a contingency that Halsey never executed. The miscommunication would nearly cost America the invasion. While Halsey raced north, Admiral Nishimura led his southern force into Surigao Strait and into the most complete ambush in naval history. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had positioned his forces perfectly. 39 PT boats would harass the approaching Japanese. 28 destroyers would launch torpedo attacks. And at the strait's northern exit, 6 battleships, including Pearl Harbor survivors West Virginia, Maryland, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania, waited in a line directly across the Japanese approach. Nishimura knew Kurita was delayed. He knew his force of 2 old battleships, 1 cruiser, and 4 destroyers faced overwhelming odds. At 8:13 p.m. on October 24th, he radioed his intention to charge into Leyte Gulf at 4 a.m. regardless. The mission was effectively suicidal. Beginning at 10:52 p.m., PT boats made first contact, firing 34 torpedoes, only 1 hit, on light cruiser Abukuma. But their constant reports kept Oldendorf perfectly informed of Japanese positions. At 2:58 a.m. on October 25th, Captain Jesse Coward's destroyers began their attack. USS Remy, Melvin, and McGowan launched 27 torpedoes in 75 seconds. At 3:09 a.m., 2 torpedoes slammed into Battleship Fuso's starboard side. She sheared out of formation, flooding rapidly. Within minutes, torpedoes destroyed destroyers Yamagumo, 0 survivors, and Michishio, and blew the bow off Asagumo. A second destroyer attack put additional torpedoes into Battleship Yamashiro. Nishimura, not realizing Fuso was already dying, continued sending her orders. At 3:51 a.m., Oldendorf ordered his cruisers to open fire. 2 minutes later, West Virginia, the first battleship to achieve a radar firing solution on another battleship in history, unleashed an 8-gun broadside of 16-inch shells at 22,800 yards. California and Tennessee joined within seconds. Maryland fired using the older method of aiming at waterspouts from other ships' shells. The result was devastating. Yamashiro, already torpedo damaged, was smothered in 14-inch and 16-inch shells. USS Mississippi fired exactly 1 salvo, the last battleship-to-battleship salvo in naval history. At 4:11 a.m., the radar blip representing Yamashiro bloomed on American screens, then vanished. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura died with his ship, taking all but 10 of the crew with him. Fuso had already sunk at approximately 3:38 a.m. Of her 1,620 crew, only 10 survivors ever returned to Japan. Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, arriving with a second Japanese force, saw the burning wrecks and wisely ordered retreat, but not before his flagship Nachi collided with the crippled cruiser Mogami in the darkness. The Battle of Surigao Strait was the most one-sided battleship engagement in history. The Japanese southern thrust was annihilated, but, to the north, catastrophe was unfolding. At midnight on October 25th, Kurita's center force passed through San Bernardino Strait completely unopposed. 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers descended on the American beachhead and found only Taffy 3. Task Unit 77.4.3 consisted of 6 escort carriers, slow, thin-skinned ships sailors called combustible, vulnerable, and expendable. Their only protection: 3 destroyers and 4 smaller destroyer escorts armed with 5-inch guns that couldn't penetrate Japanese armor. Yamato alone outweighed the entire American force. Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague commanded from escort carrier USS Fanshawe Bay. His wife was the sister of F. Scott Fitzgerald. At 6:37 a.m., a pilot on anti-submarine patrol reported pagoda masts on the horizon. Sprague was incredulous. "Now there's some screwy young aviator reporting part of our own forces." Ensign William Brooks flew closer and radioed back, "I can see pagoda masts. I see the biggest meatball flag on the biggest battleship I ever saw." At 7 a.m., Yamato opened fire at 20 miles. American sailors watched in disbelief as shells splashed around them in different colors. Japanese used dye markers for fire control. Yamato's shells were white, Nagato's pink, Haruna's greenish-yellow, Congo's blood red. One White Plains sailor quipped, "They're shooting at us in Technicolor." On destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland addressed his crew. "A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do our duty." On destroyer USS Johnston, Commander Ernest E. Evans, a Cherokee Creek Native American from Oklahoma, didn't wait for orders. At commissioning a year earlier, he had told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Evans immediately ordered flank speed and charged directly at the Japanese fleet. Johnston raced toward Kurita's force at 35 knots, alone. Gunnery officer Robert Hagan began firing at cruisers 9 miles away, registering over 40 hits in 5 minutes. At 7:27 a.m., Johnston launched all 10 torpedoes at heavy cruiser Kumano. One struck and blew off her entire bow, removing her from the battle. But Johnston had exposed herself. 3 18.1-inch shells from Yamato, the largest naval shells ever fired in combat, slammed into the destroyer, along with 3 6-inch secondaries. The hits destroyed her aft engine room, knocked out half her guns, and severed 2 fingers from Evans' left hand. He wrapped the wound and continued commanding. Johnston disappeared into a rain squall for 10 minutes, then emerged to fight again. The crippled destroyer engaged battleships Haruna and Congo, firing 40 shells at the giants. Around 9 a.m., Evans spotted 7 Japanese warships forming up for a torpedo attack on the carriers. With 1 engine, half her guns, and her captain missing 2 fingers, Johnston limped toward 5 enemy ships and opened fire. The Japanese smothered Johnston with return fire. One by one, her guns fell silent. With no power or communications, Evans moved to the fantail, shouting steering orders through an open hatch to men turning the rudder by hand. At 9:45 a.m., Evans gave his final order: abandon ship. He was last seen on deck, still directing his crew. As Johnston sank at 10:10 a.m., something remarkable happened. Japanese destroyer Yukikaze approached, and instead of attacking, her captain and crew lined up and saluted the sinking American ship. Commander Evans was never found. The tiny destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, designed only for convoy escort against submarines, pushed her engines to 28.7 knots, well beyond design limits. She closed to 4,000 yards of heavy cruiser chokai before launching torpedoes. Her crew believed they blew off the cruiser's stern. Roberts and destroyer Heermann then engaged Chikuma at such close range that the Japanese 8-inch guns couldn't depress low enough to hit them. The two American ships fired approximately 205-inch shells into the cruiser, then ran out of high-explosive ammunition. Roberts switched to armor-piercing rounds, then training rounds, then star shells, illumination rounds that set Chikuma's deck ablaze. When Battleship Congo found Roberts, 3 14-inch shells ended the fight. Lieutenant Commander Copeland was wounded on the bridge. The ship sank by the stern. Her crew spent 50 hours in the water. Of 224 men, 89 died in action, and 25 more died from shark attacks and exposure. Escort carrier USS Gambier Bay was closest to the Japanese. Unable to outrun cruisers making 30 knots, she became an easy target. At 8:17 a.m., an 18.1-inch shell from Yamato sliced through her hangar. At 8:20 a.m., another hit below the waterline flooded her engine room. By 8:43 a.m., she was dead in the water. Gambier Bay capsized at 9:07 a.m. and sank 4 minutes later, ensign still flying, the only American aircraft carrier ever sunk by enemy surface gunfire. Taffy 3's aircraft attacked with whatever they had, and many had nothing useful for armored warships. Pilots dropped depth charges on cruisers, fighters strafed battleships with .50 caliber machine guns, hoping to kill exposed personnel. After expending ammunition, pilots made dry runs, fake attack passes with empty planes to distract Japanese gunners. One air group commander flew for 2 hours making dry runs after dropping his bombs. Another pilot made 20 strafing runs, 10 of them completely out of ammunition. These attacks sank 3 heavy cruisers and kept Japanese gunners disrupted throughout the engagement. At 9:20 m, with American carriers seemingly at his mercy, Admiral Kurita gave an order that stunned his staff. All ships, my course north, speed 20. He had not slept for 3 days. His flagship had been torpedoed from under him. He believed he was fighting fleet carriers, not escort carriers. He had received reports of American carriers to the north. The reports were false. But none of these factors fully explains why Kurita turned away from victory. Years later, he told a friend he'd turned around because he did not think it was worth sacrificing the lives of his men for what reconnaissance revealed were only empty transports. The controversy has never been resolved. Subordinates called him a coward. Others called him a great seaman who understood futility. If Kurita had continued to Leyte Gulf, 130,000 American soldiers would have been trapped on the beach without naval support. While Taffy 3 fought for survival, Halsey was 300 miles north, attacking Ozawa's decoy carriers. Admiral Kincaid sent increasingly desperate messages. Enemy forces attacking our forces. Request Lee proceed top speed. Then, fast battleships urgently needed immediately at Leyte. At 9:44 a.m., Admiral Nimitz at Pearl Harbor, who rarely intervened in ongoing battles, sent a query to Halsey asking the location of Task Force 34. Standard procedure required padding, nonsense phrases added to short messages to complicate enemy decryption. A communications officer added, "Turkey trots to water" at the beginning and "the world wonders" at the end. The beginning padding was properly removed. The end padding was not. The message delivered to Halsey read, "Where is RPT? Where is Task Force 34, the world wonders?" Halsey believed Nimitz was insulting him. I was stunned, as if I had been struck in the face. The paper rattled in my hands. I snatched off my cap, threw it on the deck, and shouted something I am ashamed to remember. His chief of staff grabbed him. "Stop it! What the hell's the matter with you? Pull yourself together!" Even then, Halsey continued north for another hour, before finally ordering Task Force 34 south at 11:15 a.m. His battleships had been 42 miles from Ozawa's remaining ships, within gun range of the surface engagement Halsey had dreamed of since his Naval Academy days. The battleships arrived at San Bernardino Strait too late. Kurita had already withdrawn. In what historians sardonically call the Battle of Bull's Run, the most powerful American ships never fired a shot in the decisive engagement. October 25, 1944 introduced a new horror to naval warfare. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi had formed the first organized Special Attack Corps just days earlier at Mabalacat Airfield. With only 41 operational aircraft remaining in the Philippines, he concluded, There is only one way of assuring that our meager strength will be effective to a maximum degree. That is to organize suicide attack units. At 10:51 a.m., as Taffy 3's survivors watched, Lieutenant Yukio Seki's Zero dove through anti-aircraft fire and crashed through the flight deck of escort carrier USS St. Lo. The 250-kilogram bomb penetrated to the hangar deck, where aircraft were being refueled and rearmed. Gasoline fires erupted, followed by 6 secondary explosions. St. Lo sank in 30 minutes, the first major warship destroyed by kamikaze attack. Other kamikazes damaged escort carriers Kitcon Bay, Fanshawe Bay, Kalinin Bay, White Plains, Santee, and Suwannee. Nearly 300 Americans died in the first day's attacks alone. The tactics that would kill over 7,000 Allied sailors by war's end had begun. Halsey's Third Fleet destroyed Ozawa's carriers with overwhelming force, over 1,000 aircraft against 108. The attack sank all 4 carriers, including Zuikaku, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack fleet. As she listed and sank at 2:14 p.m., surviving crewmen mustered on deck, gave a final banzai, and saluted as the naval ensign was lowered for the last time. Ozawa had accomplished his mission perfectly. By sacrificing his carriers, he had drawn Halsey away from San Bernardino Strait. After the battle, he reportedly considered suicide, but was dissuaded by colleagues who pointed out he was the only one of the Japanese admirals at the Battle of Leyte Gulf who successfully carried out an assigned mission. Japanese losses were catastrophic. 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, 28 warships, and approximately 10,500 dead. The Imperial Japanese Navy effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. As Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai stated, "I felt that it was the end. American losses totaled 1 light carrier, Princeton, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort, approximately 3,000 killed." The disproportion, 8-to-1 in tonnage, reflected America's overwhelming material advantage by late 1944. The battle's strategic impact was decisive. Japan lost its access to oil from Southeast Asia. The remaining surface fleet returned to port and never sailed again in significant force. The path to Japan's home islands lay open, leading directly to Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Admiral Nimitz's private assessment captured both the controversy and the miracle. "It never occurred to me that Halsey would leave the San Bernardino Strait unguarded, that the San Bernardino detachment of the Japanese fleet did not completely destroy all of Taffy 3, is nothing short of special dispensation from the Lord Almighty." Commander Ernest Evans received the Medal of Honor posthumously, the first Native American so honored. His widow Margaret has accepted it as their 2 sons watched. USS Johnston's wreck was discovered in 2019 at 21,180 feet, one of the deepest shipwrecks ever found. Samuel B. Roberts was located in 2022 at 22,621 feet, the deepest shipwreck ever surveyed. The men of Taffy 3 accomplished the impossible. Destroyers charged battleships. Pilots attacked with empty planes. A destroyer escort fought like a battleship against cruisers 10 times her size. And when Japanese destroyer Yukikaze's captain saluted the sinking Johnston, he acknowledged what Samuel Eliot Morison would later write. "In no engagement of its entire history has the United States Navy shown more gallantry, guts, and gumption than in those 2 morning hours between 0730 and 0930 off Samar.